Excellent.
Hi, welcome back to the Rumble stream. We're here with the special guest, the author of this book, Professor Richard Wolff. He's a professor emeritus at economics at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and is currently a visiting professor at the New School in New York City. For 15 years, his program, Economic Update, has broadcast his economic analysis globally to millions. His latest book, there it is, Understanding Capitalism, clarifies confusion over what capitalism is, its problems and flaws, and shows how this system shapes us all today and also points us toward an emerging, better economic system. And it's available right now at Democracy at Work, ebook, only $17. Please welcome to the show, back to the show, Professor Richard Wolff. How you doing?
Okay, Jimmy, glad to be here.
So, can you tell us about basically what is capitalism? What is its problems and flaws?
Okay, capitalism is a particular way of organizing the production and distribution of the goods and services we all depend on: our food, our clothing, our shelter, our transportation, our education, you name it. And in the history of the human race that we're all part of, or at least most of us, it has taken different form. People have organized their economies differently. For example, once upon a time, and not so long ago, and even in a few places today, there were masters and slaves. That's how they did it. Some people were slaves, some people were masters. The slaves did all the work. The masters got everything the slave produced because they owned not only the product, but they owned the producer, the human being. Then we had feudalism. That's another different kind of system. No slaves, no masters, but lords and serfs. And the basic way it worked was the serf did the work, raised the animals, grew the crops, kept enough for himself and his family, and the rest gave to the lord, who therefore lived kind of high on the hog, which you'll notice if you look at castles and chateaus in Europe, which is what they use that extra output to construct. We're a different system. We don't have masters and slaves, and we don't have lords and serfs. We went through a lot of trouble, including the French and American revolutions, to get beyond that. Turns out a lot of people didn't want to be slaves, and a lot of people didn't want to be serfs. So we instituted a new system called capitalism. And instead of masters and slaves, and instead of lords and serfs, we have something called employers and employees. One of them sits on top and makes all the decisions. You don't need me to tell you who that is, you know. And the other one comes to work in the factory, the office, the store, and does what he, she, they are told. Sit there, work with this, do that, use this machine, and at the end of the day, go home, have a pizza, come back tomorrow, do it all again. Okay? We have a capitalist system of employers and employees. We thought we were going to get liberty, equality, freedom, democracy by putting slavery behind us and by putting feudalism behind us. And those hopes and those dreams were reasonable. But we made a mistake. What we didn't understand is employer-employee is different, but it shares something in common. And the thing it shares in common with slavery and feudalism is that a few people sit at the top and have the power and the wealth in their hands, and the rest of us don't. And that what we really want, and wanted all along, we may have called it freedom when we were slaves. We might have called it liberation when we were serfs. But what we really wanted was a system in which we really could be our own boss, not have one over us. And capitalism isn't that, because it's a system, as everyone watching this show knows, in which a few people are the boss and the rest of us are the ones who get bossed around. Our language shows it. We're aware of it. I wanted to teach people who've asked me all my life, as a teacher, as an activist, how does this system work and why does it work this way? Well, just to give you very brief, really brief, I promise. One of the things that should surprise no one in the system, if you've just understood what I said, is that if a few people are sitting at the top, they're going to keep a disproportionate amount of whatever gets produced for themselves. The masters did it in slavery. The lords did it in feudalism. Guess what? The capitalists, the employers, the ones who have the wealth, accumulate even more. You and I both watch the headlines like everybody, and we learn that Elon Musk, just to pick on him, has more money than, the Lord above, and than many countries. That's how far this crazy stuff can go. He's got more wealth than the ancient pharaohs in Egypt that we all learned about in Sunday school a million years ago. But we actually reproduce that now. And then once you look at that, you realize this inequality, it always has the same result as if we didn't know from our history. If a lot of people are poor and a few people are very rich, it leads to all kind of trouble. The rich are afraid that the poor are going to come and snatch it. So they like to have a lot of cops around, a lot of police, a lot of control, because they're afraid. The poor are full of envy, and that eats at their guts, and they feel terrible they can't give their children what those rich people are able to give their. We know what it does. It tears communities apart. Americans used to be really happy to say, not that it was true, but it had some truth to it, that we're all middle class. This is a middle class country, very few rich, very few poor. We're all, well, there was a lot of truth to it. We were less unequal 50 years ago than all the countries of Europe. But in the last 50 years, it got reversed. We are now more unequal than the countries in Europe, and it shows. It shows in our politics. It shows in how we don't trust each other. It shows in how our country is being torn apart, and it's not just here in the United States. So what this book does is tell that story. Go through point by point how it is that capitalism works in this way, why it has brought us to this situation. And I'm not unmindful as we're talking that as if on cue, not that I have the power, but as an illustration, we are also a very unstable system, because in the last 3 days of the stock market, Thursday, Friday of last week, and Monday of this week, it fell apart. We have another crash. Capitalism is an unstable system. I used to say to my students when I lectured, if you lived with a roommate as unstable as capitalism, you would have moved out long ago. You would have said, no, thank you. I don't want a system that every 4 to 7 years, on average, in every country, crashes. Look at the words we have: downturn, recession, depression, crisis, meltdown. I mean, I could bore you for hours with all the words because it's so constant. We've been trying for 300 years to get over that, and we haven't been able to do it. Lots of smart people working very hard to get us out of that instability. And what do I tell you? In the year 2000, we had the dot-com crash, remember? Then in the year 2008, we had the subprime mortgage crash. And then in 2020, we had the COVID-19 crash. And right now, we're going into, well, it hasn't got a name yet, but I'm sure those clever economists like me will come up with a name. The names change, but the phenomena constantly. And what it means, and this is my last point, it means that people who live in capitalism, whether they're aware of it or not, are constantly worried. But that's not irrational. That's correct. They understand, even if they can't put it into words, that this is a system that every 4 or 5 years throws large numbers of people out of work, closes lots of businesses that are producing perfectly useful things that we all need. This is crazy. We don't want this. Nobody wants it. We never can stop having it. That's a sign of a system whose time has come, has grown. We've had it for a while. Now it's time to say, bye-bye. We as a human race can do better. The slaves could do better than slavery. The serfs better than feudalism. And I'm convinced that we can do better than capitalism. We just have to understand and make the effort, and we will do it and look back on getting beyond capitalism the way we now look back on getting beyond slavery and feudalism.
So when you say getting beyond capitalism, you don't mean so there would still be a system in which you could write a book and then sell it for a profit, right?
Absolutely. We're talking, a lot of the myths, and the book is full of these. It goes through it. A lot of the myths that grew up were understandable. They were efforts by people who did real well in capitalism, who liked it, did well for them. There's always people the master thought slavery was pretty good, and the Lord thought feudalism was pretty good. We shouldn't be surprised that the people who sit at the top, in most cases, find nice things about the system, and so they tell stories as if kind of that's available to everybody, even though it isn't. And I try to go through those. But one of them is, if you didn't have capitalism, well, then you couldn't start your own business. That's silly. In slavery, you could start your own slave plantation. People did it. In feudalism, you could start your own feudal manor, which is what they called it. And in capitalism, you can start your own business. But if you set up a socialist system in which people work together as a community producing goods and services, you would want to create the opportunities for people with new ideas or new ways of doing things to start a business, to grow a business, and all the rest. What you wouldn't do, and this is the craw that somehow sticks in people's mind when they hear about it. You wouldn't be able to build your business beyond a certain point by exploiting, by taking large numbers of people who can't share in all that business can do because they're your employees. You will have to come to some accommodation with them. They are human beings like you, and in the socialist image that I'm talking about, they have the right to participate in what you have created, just like you have the right, they have the right to participate in what you helped to create. It's a kind of a sense, let me put it this way. At the Christmas party, in every job I've ever had, the boss gets up, rickety, he's a little drunk, and stands on the table and tells everybody at the Christmas party, we had a good year, and I want to thank each and every one of you for the contribution you made to the successful year we had. And then he takes 90% of what those people's labor produced for himself and has a really good Christmas and New Year vacation. They don't. My argument is you got to mean it. You got to understand that everybody participates, and that has to be recognized in the distribution of wealth and recognized in the distribution of respect. You're not going to be respectful of your fellow human being if you have a ranking of employer-employee. That's what's got to go. And we've got to be courageous enough to try. The same people who used to think you have to have a king, you have to have somebody who sits at the top of the society, an emperor, a czar, or whatever you wanted to call him. And then, a few hundred years ago, we got rid of them. We said no more kings, no more monarchy, none of that. Or if we do, it's a ceremonial something for tourists to visit, but we don't take it seriously. Well, guess what? The kings are still there, but only they changed their name. Now they're called CEOs. They're the people who are little emperors who sit in that factory or in that office or in that store, telling everybody what to do and trying to make everyone to believe you can't run a business without somebody at the top. Yeah, you can run a country without a king, and you can run a business without people at the top. You can all together make a community that produces the goods and services. That's the idea.
So why was capitalism 50 to 70 years ago in the United States able to create a country of middle-class people where everybody was sharing in the profits of their work? Right now, that ended somewhere around 1980, where workers' productivity got decoupled from their pay.
Right.
So they used to, if they produced more and everybody, then they would make more money. That's over. That stopped right around 1980. What happened? Why was capitalism able to make a fair society before, but it isn't anymore?
It's very typical. If you look at the history of empires, the history of different systems, they have progressive, if you like, periods early on. They do well. They distribute stuff well. They make a very excited, loyal, committed population, and then something happens. Well, let's take a look at what happened 50 years ago, because you're spot on with your history here. We had a successful capitalism, probably the most successful in the history of the world, a tremendous 100 years, roughly 1825 to 1925, and then again a spurt after World War II. Why? Well, we had some extraordinary things. Tremendous climate, tremendous soil, 2 oceans on either side, rivers, I mean, really fantastic. And then the dark side of this pretty story, we got rid of all the people that were here. We had a kind of ethnic cleansing, which still is a problem for America, as you and I both know. Okay, so, but with the cleared land, we could say to these Europeans who came, here it is. They got everything, the land, the water, the climate. You could produce fantastically. Ironically, if you want to understand American history, in the early years, there wasn't so clear. But then they discovered something that was very valuable here in the United States. They discovered that south of the Mason-Dixon line, you had the water, you had the climate, you had the heat. You could grow something that was the most valuable thing in the world at that time, cotton. So we could grow cotton, and we could sell it to Britain, which was the great producer of cotton textiles. We had everything we needed to produce something, sell it, and become rich. We lacked only one thing, labor. We had killed off the native population. They weren't there to do it. And Europeans did not want to do that kind of work in that climate. We solved that problem, and you and I know we still live with the results of the African slaves who solved that problem. But we became a rich society, and we grew, and you're right. At least for the white people, the growth in productivity, the growth in output was reasonably well shared. The profiteers made a good profit, but the real wages of the American working class went up for 100 years. It produced the uniqueness of this country, the feeling that Americans have had for generations, that your children will live better than you, your grandchildren better than your children, that somehow it's built into America. Religious people could praise God if that's what they thought was going on, making this remarkable story not available to anybody else on this planet for a while. It was truly remarkable. But the logic was capitalist. What that means is everybody was driven by profit. And in the 1970s and 80s, profit moved. And Americans didn't understand it, but they should have. And American leaders should have talked honestly. Here's what I mean. In the 70s and 80s, thanks, among other things, to jet travel and the internet and all of that, it became clear to American capitalists, employers, that if what was driving them was profit, and it was, and if what was keeping them working was called competition, and that was, then the best place for you to be was not the United States. The very success here had driven the wages up. That's why we were successful. But you could go to China or India or Brazil, and you could get the work done for a whole hell of a lot less. Which meant that the profit, if you could just work it out to produce it there, pay low wages, and bring it back to the United States and sell it at the going price, your profit would be spectacular. Here's the irony for those who are able to follow the logic. Here's the irony. Capitalism is a profit-driven system. As the capitalists themselves will tell you if you ask them. It's the bottom line. It's the thing that motivates and drives us. And if the profit gets greater somewhere else, I have no choice. My competitor is going to move. I have to move too. That's the history of the United States. Capitalism started in New England. Then it moved to the Midwest. Then it moved to the Southwest, Northwest, the American South. It kept moving. Then it went to Mexico and Canada. The sad reality is capitalism, capital, and profits have now left the United States. And here's the thing that's most troubling to Americans, but they're right about it. It's not coming back. It's not coming back. All this reshoring nonsense, not coming back. And not because anybody's a bad guy or a good guy. It's not that. The profit isn't here. Here's what China offers every capitalist in the world. Come here, you have cheaper labor than where you are, and you have the biggest growing market in the world. I have taught at business schools. That's what we teach business school students. You want to succeed in your entrepreneurship, go where the wages are small and the market is growing quickly. That ain't the United States, and it hasn't been for 40 years, and the capitalists are gone, leaving us with a country which is not on the rise anymore, and we're all upset about it, which makes sense, and we're all worried about it, which makes sense. And we turn on each other. That don't make any sense at all, because we're not the problem for one another. We got a system that shouldn't be the one we have. We shouldn't be doing what's profitable. We should be doing what's best for the community. But the only way to get that happening is if the community runs the business. If a small number of people in this country, 10% own 80% of the stocks and bonds. If you leave the situation that way, the system is going to work for them. And that's the problem. They've done real well in the last 40 years. Stock market boom, despite the crashes, has been remarkable because they're cashing in, if you own shares, on moving the capitalist system to Asia. Those of us who lost our jobs, those of us whose communities are decaying, we didn't win. But the people at the top, they're the ones cashed in on this great profit opportunity. We've got to face that, because if we don't, we're just going to be treading water, watching this situation get worse and worse, which you and I have been doing really for the last 30 to 40 years. Final little statistic. In 1970, Detroit was a booming, successful capitalist economy, building automobiles, having a powerful union, the UAW, getting good wages for working people, blah, blah, all of that. Presidents of the United States brought visitors to Detroit, showing them even black African-American workers had jobs and decent incomes. They could send their kids to school too. Real showcase. 2 million people was the population of Detroit. What is it now? 700,000. We drove the majority of the people out. No jobs. No, large parts of that city are wasteland. I've been there. I've watched. I've walked through it. I'm sure many of your viewers know it very, very well. And that story is replicated in Cleveland or in Wilmington, Delaware, or a dozen other places you can all name. I was born in a place called Youngstown, Ohio. Another example, right? So we know, we've been through it. It's time to say thank you. You played your role in human history. You developed technology. There were things capitalism achieved no one can take away. But it's over. It's no longer the thing that we need. It may be the thing other people need, but we don't. We have to graduate. And if we do, we can build a different and better economy, and the world will once again pay attention, because that will be the remarkable thing. Holding on to an old system when all the new dynamic is somewhere else. Come on, we know it.
So,
final example, Jimmy, one more. Okay. I know I'm stealing a lot of time. I don't mean to, but it's a good story to tell. The best and the cheapest electric cars made in the world today are made in China, and they're made by the Chinese. All right? I know this troubles Americans. I could give you other examples. It's not the only story out there, not at all. But I'm going to use that one. If you go to Europe right now, a quarter of the electric vehicles on the road are the Chinese electric vehicles. The most successful company, BYD Corporation, you probably never heard of it because it's Chinese. But there are no Chinese cars on the road in the United States, electric cars. Why is that? Because we have 100% tariff. In other words, if the Chinese deliver an electric car here for 30 grand, the cost to an American would be the 30 grand that goes to China to pay for it, plus another 100%, 30 grand Uncle Sam tariff. So it would cost us 60 grand. We're not going to get them. We're going to pay $45,000 for an inferior electric car made here. Okay, that's not sustainable. That's not how capitalism works. We can do it for a while, but the profit motive, it's all going somewhere else. I don't want to fight a battle I know I'm going to lose. Going beyond capitalism, making us all together our own boss, the dream of most Americans. Let's do it together. Let's have businesses run collectively. Let's give a special income, special reward to the person who starts a business, who has the new idea. Fine. All of that's fine. But change the way we organize business. If we don't, this system is going down and it's going to take us with it. And I don't think anyone here wants that.
So you're saying change the way we actually do business, meaning that so when I was in Boise, Idaho, I went to a grocery store and it was owned by the employees. It was called a co-op. So is that what you're suggesting, that we move away from that kind of, but even that system into a system of co-ops? So yep. So a capitalist who starts a business can't all of a sudden one day say, hey, you know what? I can make more money if I move this business from Studio City, California, and I outsource it to Vancouver, or I outsource, or we do all this work over in China. So now one person makes that decision, but you're saying now if a collective of people who all work there got to make that decision, they would never send their job but how does that happen politically? Do you have any? I mean, it doesn't seem like.
Yeah. Well, I could give you several examples, but anyway, you've got it right. That's exactly what I'm after. It's fine with me if the co-ops buy and sell from each other, so there's no problem. If you want to have a market system, how they connect to one another, fine. Just like we now have a market system where capitalist enterprises interact with one another, co-ops can do that too. But you're exactly right. It has to be a democratic, one person, one vote decision of the people. And I can clearly show you, and you all know it without me telling you, that if the workers together decide these things, they would never move their jobs, their families, disorient their whole life in order to move to a country they don't speak the language, they don't know the history, the culture, all of that. So that's exactly what we're after. Now, politically, how to do it. I'm going to give you just a couple of examples because these are real. They're happening because I want to show people it's already underway. It's not just pie in the sky, some idea I have of something that might happen in some distant future. In 1985, so we're talking 30 years ago or more, 40 years ago, in Italy, not particularly communist country, a law was passed. And the law passed, here's how it went. If you become unemployed in Italy, lose your job, you have a choice. Let's call it Plan A, Plan B. Plan A, you get a weekly check like you do on the unemployment line in this country. That's one option. They call it the dole over there, or the Italian word for dole. But you have a second choice, written into the law of Italy. If you get at least 9 other unemployed people like yourself, here's what the government offers you. We will give you your entire year or two of weekly checks in a lump sum. We'll give it to you right now, and we'll give it to each of the 9 plus other unemployed if you use it to start your own co-op business. The argument of the Italians was, if you're if you're unemployed for a long period of time, it's very bad for your head. It makes you feel unworthy. It puts strains and stresses on your family life and everything else. We don't want that. That's not a successful way of dealing. You'd be much happier if you were able to continue to work. You might even be doubly happy if you were in charge of the business that was giving you a job. In other words, you gave yourself a job, but you don't have the money. We're going to give you money we would have given you anyway. No extra money out of the government's pocket. You can't qualify for unemployment for the next 2 or 3 years because you've gotten it basically in advance. And they have co-ops all over Italy. In one region, the Emilia-Romagna, some people may know that area around Bologna in Italy, 40% of their economy is worker co-ops. They've done it. They've been very successful for decades. Americans don't have to start from scratch. There are models all over the place. England has them. Germany has them. Here's an example that may blow your mind. The most successful worker co-op is actually in Spain, in the city of Mondragon, just below the Pyrenees Mountains that separate Spain from France. They have 100,000 people. They started in a Roman Catholic church in the city of Mondragon in 1956, a priest and 6 parishioners. They made a joke during the Sunday ceremonies. If we wait for somebody to come here and hire us, we'll be unemployed the rest of our lives. It was a poor part of Spain at that time. So the priest said, how about we become our own employer? We become a co-op. And he started, Father Arizmendi by name. That's what he did. Well, it's 100,000 people now. It's called the Mondragon Corporation. It's been around for more than half a century. It is the most successful worker co-op. And by the way, if I had a lot of time, which I know we don't, I could tell you about the co-op. Worker co-ops have their problems, it's not heaven, it's not, the final solution, none of that. But it's a better way of going about it, and we have plenty of models. The one in Spain is so successful that they have their own university, the Mondragon University. Well, I've been there. You can go there. They have courses, how to start a worker co-op, how to finance a worker co-op, how to solve the human problems as people go from a hierarchical workplace to a much more egalitarian workplace. I think Americans, with our peculiar history, might be a lot more successful than others in making a transition. But again, it's not only the carrot of the transition, it's the stick, that if you look around at our capitalism, for more and more of our people, it's not a system that's working very well. And that's the biggest push to move better, to go beyond. And I think that's happening.
I think the biggest problem is that, they say capitalism eventually eats itself, and that's what we're kind of living in that world now, right?
That's right.
There's a handful of oil companies, there's a handful of insurance companies, there's a handful of media companies. I mean, there used to be 50 giant media companies in this country in 1980, and then Bill Clinton did the Telecommunications Act in 1996, and now there's 6, which is why journalism sucks so hard, is because they no longer come from working class backgrounds. The journalists, they come from Ivy League universities, and they're hired by people like Jeff Bezos to go do the news because they know those people are going to be class loyal. And so so now we don't have real news anymore, which is why shows like ours are popular, because people are still hungry for it. But then they also find ways to suppress us now, which is what they do on YouTube. It's called, they push what they call authoritative news sources, right? So they've learned how to suppress us and keep us small while they keep the oligarch-owned news organizations running. Nobody used to ever go to YouTube to watch NBC News or CBS or the AP, but they now, because those are pushed on people, though, they get lots of views, and now I know you have to go, but do you have time to quickly cover the story of the stock market crashing today?
Yes.
Okay.
Very simply.
Can I just show this? So Warren Buffett just a couple of days ago sold like 50% of his stock in Apple. He now holds around $300 billion in cash, and his company has sold stocks like never before, including Apple. So what he's doing is he knows there's a crash coming, so he's getting rid of his stock, and he wants to have a lot of cash on hand so he can buy up a lot of stock at bargain basement prices. That's what that's about, right?
Absolutely. And listen, Warren Buffett's a smart man, and most of you watching are just as smart as he is. He understands that if he releases the information a few days ago, which he is required by law to do, that he has dropped his holdings of Apple by 50%, it's a screaming signal. Get out of the market. This guy who knows what's going on, he's just gotten out. That's not a signal for people to jump in. That's a signal for people to say, whoa, time for me to pull back. And the irony is his action can control what happens in the market. He's got so much money, such as the $277 billion, that any which way he goes, drops the price of Apple because they can't find that many people to buy the shares that he's trying to sell. So he's what's called a market mover. He can move the market. Knowing what he's doing, of course, leads him and his associates, he's never alone, to understand that if he dumps Apple, down will go Apple, down will go a whole bunch of others, giving them the opportunity to take the money they got from selling Apple here and buy back twice as much of it for half the money, 3 days later, making a profit that will take him into $300 billion. It's becoming obscene. One person is shaking the entire economy. You and I are sitting here trying to figure out. Meanwhile, he's sitting there having the 14th mint julep or whatever it is he drinks and making decisions that are overwhelmingly, look, that's not democracy. Giving some people that kind of power while the rest of us are spectators at our own economic decline, that's not a democratic economic system. Look, capitalism has been unstable from its birth. Every 4 to 7 years, the National Bureau of Economic Research, a government body, tracks them. Every 4 to 7 years on average, it crashes. That means you're going to have a bunch of them in your lifetime or my lifetime or Warren Buffett's. What kind of a system is this that we're either in a crash or worried about it? Every president wonders, is it going to hit and drive me out of office? Is it going to hit a little differently and put me back in office? It's a roller coaster. We're not children. We can work this out. We can manage an economy not to do this to ourselves. That's the horrible irony here. It isn't happening like hurricanes. It's something we can control.
So the thing that seems craziest to me is that now they're saying because of this market crash, well, let me just tell people how much it's crashed, right? So U.S. stocks took a nosedive Monday. Worldwide, this happened also. Yes. So the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped 1,000 points or 2.7%. By 3 p.m., the Dow was still down more than 1,000 points or about 2.6%, while the NASDAQ was down 3.8%, and the S&P 500 posted a 3.2% decline. So what they're going to do now, now they have the Fed chairman, Austin Goolsbee in Chicago, the Fed chairman in Chicago. He said that the interest rates are too high, right? He says the Fed's job, this is what he says, the Fed's job is very straightforward. Maximize employment, stabilize prices, maintain financial stability. That's what we're going to do. So this, to me, the crazy part of this is they've raised interest rates. So the Fed has raised interest rates. And why did they do that? Because there was inflation. And how do you stop inflation? Well, the Fed goes, we raise interest rates so we make it more expensive to do business, which means people get laid off. So the literally the way that they solve the problem of inflation is they get a bunch of workers thrown out of their jobs. That's what they're doing on purpose. That's not like, oh, we didn't know that was going to happen. They raise interest rates so that people lose their job, right?
Absolutely. And look at the irony of what you just read. The job of the Federal Reserve, which was started in 1913, it's over a century old. It was to have stable prices. If you have an inflation, it means they failed. They didn't do their job. If you're supposed to have maximum employment, and by the way, the initial wording was full employment. They changed the word full to maximum. Did that in 1946. But they failed. The joke with the Fed is they failed to have price stability. They failed to have full employment. They're always telling you what hard work we're doing to bring down the inflation. Wait a minute, Jack. You failed. That's what you're telling us. If you're working to get it down, it means it went up. And if you're working to get people back to work, it's because you let them be unemployed. It makes no sense. Unemployment is an irrational act. I'll tell you why. Unemployed people are not going to die. They're going to eat. They're going to work. They're going to, wear clothing. They need a shelter. They need to consume, but you're not letting them work. Normally, if you would give them a job, they would contribute as well as take. Unemployment is a crazy thing for any community to do, and we know how to solve those problems. We can put people to work. We've done it. They don't want to do it because they don't want anyone to mess with their privileges at the top, their decision about how to solve a problem. And so they don't want any interference, especially not in a government which might be shaped by the fact that it's one person, one vote politically, and therefore the mass of people who are not employers, they're employees, might use their political power to undo an economic system that isn't working for them anymore.
So when there's inflation like we've had, right? We had the biggest inflation in the last 20 years, and that was most of that, I'm going to guess, I'm going to ask you, was caused because corporations decided to start gouging their customers and inflating their prices, and corporate profits are through the roof. So wouldn't a smarter thing be, instead of throwing people out of work, to maybe take some of that money, some of that profit away from the corporation in some way? Wouldn't that make more sense if the Fed could figure out a way to do that?
Yes, it's easy to do. It's called taxation. But here's a bigger irony, Jimmy. In 1971, we had a terrible inflation in this country, even worse than the one we just had. And we had a conservative Republican president, Richard Nixon. And on August 15th, he went on the radio and TV and he said, we got a terrible inflation. Here's what I'm going to do. He didn't raise interest rates the way we acted in the last 3 years, as if it were the most natural, necessary thing the world had ever seen. Nonsense. He said, as of tomorrow morning, if you raise your price, I'm going to arrest you and throw you in jail. If you're a union and you raise your wage, ditto, same thing. It was called a wage price freeze because that's what it was. It brought the inflation down overnight. I'm not arguing that we should do that, although I would favor it. I'm not arguing that. I'm arguing there's something wrong in a society that did that last time in 1971, and now, 40 years later, acts as if there were no question raising interest rates is the only thing, and that's what we're going. No discussion, no debate, no nothing. And you might enjoy it. I like to tell people because they find it funny. I got my PhD at one of those Ivy League universities, at Yale University. And at those days, the PhDs in economics were almost all men, but there were very few women. So we all knew the young women that were in our classes because there weren't very many of them. And when I went through Yale and got my PhD, I sat in the same room, listening to the same teachers, reading the same articles as one of the two women in my class, whose name was Janet Yellen. She knows. And yet I watch her up there giving statements, and part of me says, what happened? You get caught up in this. You don't think the way you're capable of. And much of what I say on my interviews and my program is what I've tried to say tonight. There are other and better ways of doing things. Let's be the creative Americans that we have a reputation for being. If something is outmoded and outdated like capitalism, let's face it, Let's talk about how we can do better, and let's get to work doing it. I think the world will once again have the kind of respect it's not going to get otherwise.
They say that the unemployment rate is now 4.3%, but you and I know they don't count their unemployment rate the way they used to in the 80s, right?
That's right.
They changed it different. So right now, this is bad for the economy. They say the last month, the Labor Department said that non-farm payrolls increased by 114,000 jobs, and the unemployment rate increased to 4.3%, worse than expected, and that's what's spurring a lot of this stocks crashing, right? But first of all, just real quickly, guess what stock isn't crashing? The weapons manufacturers. Okay, just so you know. All right, because that's the one thing we still make here in the United States. We still make the world's weapons. But what would you say if you had to guess? What is the real unemployment rate? I've had people on this show say it's somewhere around 15%, and some people say even higher. What would you guess if we counted it the way we did in the 80s?
There have been some studies, and the basic answer is 2 to 3 times what that is. So instead of 4.3, I would say somewhere between 9 and 12%. If you count all the people who've given up looking, if you count all the people who are temporary workers but want a full-time job but can't get it, if you count all the people that are under the table, where there's no registration, they're not legally counted, but they're crucial, which in certain industries like fast food or construction is a significant part of the workforce. And then there's all the immigrants who are afraid to be counted because their status is shaky, and so they make a point of not doing it, which allows the employer to get away with not paying them or paying them under, all of that stuff is going on. You'd have to really be very much careful not to. These are the minimum numbers. They are not an adequate understanding of how many people there are who want to work, but for whom there is no job.
And another funny thing they do every time they come out and say, hey, we added 114,000 jobs, about 2 or 3 months later, they come back and go, hey, you know what? We got that wrong. It wasn't that many jobs. It was way less jobs, right? They've been doing that now for almost 2 years straight. Am I wrong about that?
No, that's correct. In fact, now every month, when they issue the data for that month, they tell you, here are the corrections for the 2 months before, and those can be very big, so you can get these headlines. We did it great and low unemployment, because the headline is what this month is. The headlines don't include the corrections from before, which can be bigger than the increase this month. So it's played with. It is played with by Republicans to make them look good, or Democrat, whoever has to defend these numbers massages them, is the polite way of saying it.
Well, how do you have I've been predicting this coming. I took my money out of the stock market. I put it in gold. I didn't know where else to put it, and I put it in T-bills. My retirement money, right? I don't want to wake up one day and have my 401k be gone. I don't need to make money on my retirement. I just want it to be there when I retire, right? So, how bad? I feel like a genius right now when this is happening, because I've been saying they've been holding this economy together with duct tape and bubble gum because they wanted to get it to the election, and it's not making it, right? So now it's starting to tank. And do you think this is going to be as bad as 2008, or do you make those kind of predictions?
You can't do it. I would urge you, if I start making predictions like that, don't listen to me. And if you hear anybody else do it, nobody knows. Every one of these is unique. The only thing we know is that this is a system prone, on average, every 4 to 7 years to do this to us. The last big one was in the year 2000 when the pandemic hit. We had a terrible 2020, sorry, yes. So we're now 4 years, right? We're at the beginning of the averages kicking in. So my advice to anybody who asks me is, at the very least, be extremely cautious, because this is a situation in which you can lose your shirt. You said 3%, 4%, that's all correct. But there were specific stocks and groups of stocks that did much worse. If you happen to be invested in those, you are really in trouble now. And people who want to change the Social Security system to make it stocks and bonds, you could lose your entire retirement. Don't do that. That's a safety. Be caught up in capitalism is to be caught up in a fantasy that things only go up. They don't. They go up and they go down. And you better be aware of that. Otherwise, you'll make unbelievably dangerous mistakes.
So my advice is go buy Raytheon and put your money in war and death.
And
we
Big
have
Pharma, too.
And Big Pharma. We have a death economy. Yeah. And anyway, everybody should check out your new book, Understanding Capitalism. And where can they get it?
Best place is to go to our website, democracyatwork.info. And you go there and it'll tell you how to get the book and all the rest.
Okay. Professor Richard Wolff, I appreciate your time. It's always great to talk with you. And congratulations on the book.
Thank you very much, Jimmy, and best to you as well.
Okay. Over to Steph.
All right. You know, we're going to go to a card so we can bring Kurt back
Okay,
in.
let's go to a break. We'll be right back.
All right.
Because democracy basically means government by the people, of the people, for the people. But the people are retarded.
If I were Rabbi Shmuley and diddle-diddle-diddle-digga-digga-diddle-dum, all day long I'd diddle little bums. If I were a Shmuley man, I'd peddle all my dildos, dreidel dildos, selling dildos with my daughter and her mum. If I were a Jewish Shmuley man, I'd be digging with a dildo in my bum. I'd wear a grotesque nose and go grab some goyim right on the nipple with a pinch. A Shabbos lap dance brace for the youngest mensch.
At this time, more than any other time, you know, revolution is necessary. It is necessary. Not only based on what has happened with the MOVE organization, you know, the babies that have been murdered, you know, MOVE adults that have been murdered, bombs being dropped on us, but past that to what is happening with all black people, so-called minority people, money poor people. This government, as has been said earlier, has waged war on us. But something about us, particularly here in America, we don't really understand that. We don't really know what war is, for black people, for poor people, that people see as good, that they wasn't forced to do, that they didn't do to try to keep black people appeased, and calm down so that black people wouldn't riot. A prison situation is a crystallized example of that. You can make phone calls in prison. They have movies in prison. But they don't have those things because they just want to be nice to prisoners. They have those things because they know damn well if they don't have, people being able to contact their family, if they don't have, facilities for people to sit there and watch movies, people are going to be frustrated, upset, and they're going to direct that frustration at them prison administrators. And they're going to have riots on their hands. They're going to have people in them prisons turning them prisons out. That's why they have movies. That's why they have access to phones the way they do. And a stop to it when we don't like it, or encouraging it when it's something that's in our interest. We have to call the shots. The people have to take the reins of this system and start dictating, what we need, what needs to be done. And taking the initiative to do it ourselves. We can't rely on this system. Don't people see what's happening? Every single confrontation that MOVE people have been involved in, every single issue, oppression, economic issues, every single issue facing our people, is something that can be dealt with very, very simply. All people got to do is make their wishes known. All people have to do is stand up and say, listen, we're not accepting that. Unity is the key. Unity is the key to revolution. Revolution ain't nothing to be afraid of. It ain't nothing to shy away from. Revolution, contrary to what officials, this system and those backing the officials running this system, want people to believe that revolution means violence, means blood in the street. I'm saying it can get to that point, but it don't have to be violent. When people come together and take a strong stand on an issue, this government don't have no choice but to listen. Where you think they get their authority from? They don't have no power, but they do have authority to do certain things. Where do you think they get it from? They get it from us, from the people. They get it from us accepting the things that they do to be done to stop it. Then you have some people who want to then turn around and say, yeah, well, it's the best we have, and want to make excuses. The time for excuses is over. It's over. Every man, woman, and child has to be involved in this revolution. Not only has to be, but is, whether you want to be or not. Our babies gave their lives for this revolution on May 13th. Men, women, and children were murdered. And not just MOVE babies. What about all of the young men, women, children 8, 9 years old shot down on the street by cops, by drug pushers? Where do you think that mentality comes from? It comes from this system, from the mentality of this system of getting over, making a quick buck, I'm saying that's where that needs to be done to stop it. Then, what I want people to really, really understand is that it's past time. It is past time for poor people, black people, to realize that this system has failed you. It has failed you. You can't get nothing from it. And what people got to do is withdraw our support from it and start doing for ourselves. That's what we got to do. How long How long are people going to sit back and beg, you know, this government to do what's right when for hundreds of years all you've gotten is a slap in the face? All you've gotten is this government kicking your ass. That's all. That's all black people have ever gotten from this government.
Hey, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there for more AM Joy and the rest of MSNBC. And click on any of the videos right here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. And you can get more videos from MSNBC for free every day with our newsletter. Just visit